In 1994, 5 nuns vanished from a remote Vermont monastery without a trace. For 31 years, no one knew what happened until a shepherd dog named Max uncovered a forgotten clue near the mountains. As journalist Michael Turner digs deeper, old secrets of wartime experiments, political power, and chilling BDFs with a truth long buried beneath the earth. The early morning fog clung to the forested hills of Vermont, curling around the stone spires of St. Helena Abbey like ghostly fingers. The gray, ivy-draped walls of the abbey rose from the mist, their edges blurred, giving the entire structure a spectral aura. Inside the ancient chapel, Father Michael Quinn stood at the altar, his voice steady but softer than usual as he led the small congregation in a solemn mass. Today marked the 31st anniversary of the vanishing of 5 nuns, an event that had scarred the abbey and the surrounding town of Fair Hill. Over the years, the tale had faded into folklore, whispered only to curious tourists during the long snowbound winters. But for Michael, it was no story. One of the missing was his younger sister, Emily Quinn. He had been a young priest then, devoid of any postings, and devoted postulants had entered the abbey. 3 years later, she had disappeared, along with sisters Margaret, Helena, Claire, and Rose. No signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play. They were simply gone. The years had dulled public interest, but not Michael's pain. Each anniversary Mass reopened a wound that refused to heal. He had prayed endlessly, led searches through the rugged hills, questioned everyone from local farmers to the state police. Yet no answers came. As he concluded the service, making the sign of the cross, the sparse congregation, mostly elderly parishioners now, murmured a weary. Michael's gaze lingered on the weathered faces before him. Most had grown old with this unanswered grief. A few shuffled forward to offer their condolences, hollow words repeated year after year. Michael smiled faintly and thanked them, the response automatic after so many iterations. Just as he turned to leave the altar, a faint thump echoed through the hushed church. Heads turned. An elderly man in a threadbare coat had collapsed in the back pew. Michael's heart lurched. He rushed down the aisle, kneeling beside the man, Henry Wallace, a former shepherd known around town for his eccentric tales. Henry's face was bluish, his breath shallow. Michael grasped his wrist, searching in vain for a strong pulse. Henry's lips moved. Michael leaned closer. "They still sing," the old man rasped, eyes fluttering. "On the mountain, the lady in red knows—" With a final rattling breath, Henry fell silent. His eyes stared glassily upward. Michael gently closed them, murmuring a prayer for the dying. Moments later, the ambulance arrived, but it was too late. The medics confirmed a massive heart attack as the church emptied and the medics wheeled Henry away. Michael remained unsettled. Henry had long been dismissed as a harmless old crank, infamous for claiming he heard the missing nuns singing in the hills. The townsfolk chuckled at his tales of voices drifting through the pines on moonlit night. Michael himself had once gently dismissed such talk, but Henry's dying words haunted him now. The lady in red, who was she? Unable to shake the unease, Michael found himself that afternoon standing in the cramped second-floor apartment Henry had called home. The door had been left unlocked, and the air inside smelled faintly of wood smoke and old paper. Dust motes danced in the pale sunlight streaming through lace curtains. Among the sparse furnishings, a battered armchair, a wood stove, a bookshelf sagging with forgotten volumes, Michael noticed a leather-bound journal vasting atop a stack of yellowed newspapers. Intrigued, he opened it. The first pages were filled with mundane entries about sheep, weather, and local gossip, but further in, the tone changed. June 15, 1997. Heard them again. Singing. South Slope, midnight, September 20, 2001, clearer this time, sounded like Ave Maria. No one believes me. December 24, 2005, Christmas hymns. They sing still, always the same place. Entry after entry spanned decades, each noting nights when Henry claimed to hear singing from the mountains. The final entry was dated just a week prior. Michael's hands trembled slightly as he turned another page. There, tucked between the leaves, was an old photograph, grainy, black and white, taken from a distance. A figure stood among tall pines, partially obscured by shadow. A woman, clad unmistakably in a long, flowing red dress. The image was blurred, her face unrecognizable. On the back, in Henry's shaky hand, was scrawled, "She knows." Michael's breath brought. He stared at the image, a chill creeping down his spine. Could Henry's ravings hold a kernel of truth? Who was this mysterious woman, and why had she been watching the mountains? Resolute, Michael tucked the journal and photograph into his coat. That evening, as dusk settled over Fairhill and the shadows deepened among the towering maples, Father Michael lit a solitary candle in the Abbey chapel. Before the flickering flame, he whispered a simple vow, "I will find you, Emily. I will bring you home." The next morning, the autumn sun barely pierced the thick cloud cover hanging over Fairhill. The town felt quieter than usual, as though it too mourned Henry Wallace. Michael rose early, the memory of Henry's final words and that blurred photograph weighing heavily on his mind. There were too many questions, and he could not ignore the possibility that a real clue had finally surfaced after 3 decades of futile searching. He made his way to Henry's small house once more, this time with a stronger sense of purpose. The front door remained unlocked, just as it had been the previous day. The same scent of old wood and faded paper greeted him, but now, as he stepped inside, a low growl echoed from the corner of the living room. Michael froze. Emerging from the shadows was a large, grizzled sheepdog, its thick coat matted and streaked with gray. Its sharp brown eyes fixed on him, and another warning growl rumbled from its throat. Michael recognized the dog from local stories. This was Max, Henry's loyal companion of many years. "Easy, boy," Michael said softly, holding his palms out. "I'm not here to hurt you." Max hesitated, his body tense, ears flicking. The dog's gaze flicked toward the journal peeking from Michael's coat pocket, then back to his face. After a long moment, the growling ceased, and Max let out a soft whine. He took a tentative step forward, sniffing the air around Michael. Cautiously, Michael crouched down and let Max sniff his hands. "I know you're missing him," Michael whispered. "I miss him too." As if understanding the sentiment, Max exhaled a deep breath and nudged his nose against Michael's palm. Then, unexpectedly, the dog turned and padded across the room, looking back over his shoulder. He barked once, short and sharp, as if urging Michael to follow. Interest in the dog, Max led him through the narrow hallway and into Henry's cluttered bedroom. There, beneath an old patchwork quilt on the floor, the dog began pawing at a loose floorboard. Dust rose in the air, making Michael cough, but Max was relentless. Finally, a section of the floor gave way with a soft creak, revealing a shallow compartment bag. Inside lay a faded canvas bag. Max sat beside it, tail thumping once, as though proud of his discovery. Michael reached in and pulled out the contents: several folded maps, a bundle of black and white photographs, and a small leather-bound notebook, separate from the larger journal he had already taken. Spreading the maps out on the bed, Michael saw they were detailed topographical surveys of the Green Mountain Range behind St. Helena Abbey. One in particular caught his eye. It had a large X marked in thick red ink on the southern slope, with the words "Restricted Area" scrawled in the margin in Henry's spidery handwriting. The date on the map's legend read 1995. Michael's brow furrowed. Why would a shepherd care about restricted military zones? And what had he found or heard up there that terrified him enough to label it so? Turning to the photographs, Michael sifted through faded images of forested trails, craggy cliffs, and distant peaks. Most seemed benign, scenery shots likely taken during Henry's hikes, but one photo made Max perk up sharply and press his nose against the image. Curious, Michael examined it more closely. The photograph had been taken from a high vantage point, looking down toward a narrow clearing flanked by dense pine trees. Just off-center stood a solitary figure, partly obscured by branches. The resolution was poor, the distance great, but certain details stood out. A slender build, shoulder-length hair, and a flowing dress of deep crimson. Michael's pulse quickened. The resemblance to the woman in the photo from Henry's journal was undeniable. But something else nagged at his memory. He turned the photo over. On the back was a single note in Henry's handwriting. Same woman seen again, 1995. Michael stared at the image, thoughts racing. He had seen that silhouette before, in town. Julia Turner, owner of Turner & Co., an upscale fashion boutique on Fair Hills Main Street. Julia was known for her elegance and her fondness for bold red attire. What many in town did not know or had long forgotten was that Julia had once been an art history graduate student. In 1994, she had briefly worked at the Abbey's archives as part of her thesis research on religious iconography. Could it be coincidence? Or had Julia's presence on that mountain slope all those years ago been deliberate? Why would she have returned to the site connected to the missing nuns? Michael sat heavily on the edge of Henry's bed, the map and photograph spread before him. Max rested his head on Michael's knee, eyes watchful. The pieces were aligning in strange, unsettling ways. Henry's ramblings might have been more than the delusions of an old man. The restricted area, the repeated sightings of the woman in red, and Julia's unexplained link to the Abbey. Something was buried in those mountains, and someone had gone to great lengths to keep it hidden. Resolving to confront Julia directly, Michael gathered the materials, packed them carefully, and rose. Max followed him to the door, tail wagging hesitantly. Max followed down. "You coming, old boy?" Max barked softly and trotted beside him, as if answering yes. They stepped out into the crisp morning air. The fog had begun to lift, revealing the dark ridges of the Green Mountains in the distance. Michael stared toward the peaks. Somewhere up there lay the truth. And perhaps, after all these years, it was time to bring it to light. Without another word, Michael locked Henry's door behind him and headed toward town, Max faithfully at his side. Michael walked briskly through Fair Hill's narrow streets, the morning fog giving way to weak sunlight. Max trotted faithfully by his side, earning curious glances from early shoppers and townsfolk. The photo and map weighed heavily in Michael's pocket, each step toward Turner & Co. filling him with a strange mixture of dread and anticipation. Julia Turner had never been an open book. Elegant, reserved, a woman of cultivated mystery, she kept her private life guarded. Now the evidence suggested her involvement in something far darker than fashion. As Michael approached the boutique, Max suddenly stiffened, growling softly. Michael paused. Turner & Co. occupied a restored brick building on Main Street, its tall windows displaying mannequins in high-end dresses. Through the glass, he could see Julia arranging garments on a rack. Taking a breath, he pushed the door open, a small bell chiming. The boutique smelled of sandalwood and lavender. Julia looked up, her composed expression faltering the instant she saw Max. Her hand trembled, a silk scarf slipping from her fingers. "Max," she whispered, her voice tight. "What? Why is he here?" Michael studied her reaction carefully. "You know this dog?" "I've seen him before," she stammered, eyes darting to the door as if calculating an escape. "He belonged to Henry Wallace, didn't he?" Michael nodded. "He led me to something Henry left behind, something about the mountains, about the Abbey." Julia's face paled. "You should leave, now." "Not until we talk," Michael said firmly, keeping his tone low. "Henry's dead, and I think you know more than you've admitted." Max whined softly, inching closer to Julia. She backed away instinctively, glancing at a side door. Michael followed her gaze. "If you run, I'll only follow. We both know this won't go away." Julia closed her eyes briefly, then gestured toward the counter. "Fine, but make it quick." Michael approached slowly, keeping Max at heel. "I found a photograph," he began, placing it face up on the glass countertop. "Taken in the mountains, 1995. Is this you?" Julia stared at the image, her fingers trembling as they hovered over it. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, her voice barely a whisper, she confessed. "Yes. It was me." Michael leaned in. "Why were you there?" Julia swallowed hard. "I was hiking. It wasn't supposed to mean anything, but something happened." She glanced around nervously, as if unseen ears might be listening. Max watched her intently, his head tilted. "2 years ago," she continued, voice shaking, "I went back. I couldn't let it go. I'd heard rumors, stories, so I hiked near that restricted area. I didn't cross the boundary, but I got close." Michael held his breath. "That's when I heard it," Julia whispered. "Singing. A woman's voice echoing from beneath the ground. I thought I was imagining it, but it kept going. Hymn, old Latin hymns. No one else was around. The sound was unnatural. beautiful and terrifying. She hugged her arms around herself. I ran. I haven't spoken of it since. Michael exhaled slowly. You're the second person to say that. Henry heard it too, and now he's dead. Julia's eyes widened with fear. She reached beneath the counter, pulling out a small notepad. Quickly, she scribbled something, tore the page free, and folded it. She handed it to Michael without meeting his gaze. If you want the truth, she murmured, come to the observation deck above town tonight, midnight. Tell no one. Someone's watching me. A shiver ran down Michael's spine. Who? Julia shook her head. I don't know, but they know I've seen too much. Please, be careful. Before Michael could ask more, the boutique door opened with a jingle. A well-dressed man entered, glancing around with cold eyes. Julia stiffened visibly. That's all, she whispered urgently. Go. Michael understood. Pocketing the note, he called Max to heel and exited swiftly, heart pounding. As they stepped back into the street, Max gave a low whine. Michael knelt, scratching behind the dog's ears. Good boy, he murmured. Looks like we've got a meeting to prepare for. Above the rooftops, the dark silhouette of the observation deck loomed against the sky. The wind at midnight carried a biting chill as Michael climbed the narrow, winding path leading to the old observation deck perched above Coldwater Ridge. Moonlight filtered through the bare trees, casting skeletal shadows that flickered across the forest floor. Max moved beside him, silent and alert, his eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. Michael's fingers tightened around the folded note Julia had given him. He could still see her pale face in the boutique, her trembling hands, her fear. Something about this place felt watched. As he reached the last bend, the steel structure of the deck came into view, an aging platform jutting from the cliff, overlooking the valley and, in the distance, the silhouette of the Coldwater Abbey. A lone figure stood at the railing, her outline framed by moonlight. She turned at the sound of footsteps, the hood of her long coat falling slightly to reveal tired eyes and wind-tangled hair. "You came?" she said softly. Michael nodded, stepping forward. "I need to know. Everything." Julia didn't speak right away. She glanced over her shoulder as if expecting someone to appear from the shadows. "No one followed you?" "Just Max," Michael answered. The dog sat at his side, watching her with calm intensity. Julia exhaled shakily. "Then listen carefully, because I'm not sure I'll get another chance to tell this." She walked toward the bench at the empty space beside her. Michael joined her, the silence between them filled only by the whispering wind and distant hoot of an owl. "This was 30 years ago," Julia began. 1994. I was a graduate student at Chicago University working on a thesis about religious art during wartime. Sister Martha at Coldwater Abbey offered me access to their archive. It was said they had manuscripts dating back to the 15th century. Michael stayed quiet, letting her talk. "Myself and 5 nuns. One of them was your sister, Emily." Michael's chest tightened. "We were close, Emily and I. She was kind, curious, brilliant. She helped me dig through centuries of fragile texts, translating old Latin passages. We spent hours in the basement, quiet, dusty, forgotten." "We were close?" Emily asked, voice hoarse. Hidden drawer beneath one of the stone shelves. Inside, military files, sealed envelopes, photographs, orders stamped by the U.S. Army Intelligence from 1943. Names, coordinates, reports of human experimentation in a facility beneath the Abbey. Michael stared at her, shocked. "They called it Project Echo," Julia said. "Experiments on prisoners during the war, psychological studies, sleep deprivation, even sensory manipulation. Conducted by military scientists under the guise of a humanitarian mission. And all of it was buried, hidden inside a monastery." Emily was horrified. So were the others. She paused, swallowing hard. "That night, we agreed we'd take everything to the local authorities the next day, but by morning, they were gone." "All 5, Michael blinked. "Gone?" Julia nodded. "Vanished. Their beds were untouched. No signs of struggle. I waited, terrified. Then I went to the police. And I spoke to Sheriff Thomas Green," she said, bitterness creeping into her voice. "I handed him copies of the most important documents. I told him what we'd found. He wrote it all down, thanked me, told me to stay in town, while they investigated." She turned to Michael, her expression dark. But the next day, the sheriff called me into his office. Everything had changed. He was cold, impatient. Said he couldn't find any trace of the nuns' arrival at the Abbey that summer. That my statements were contradictory. That the files I gave him were misplaced. Michael's jaw clenched. "He told me to pack my things and leave Coldwater," Julia said, her voice cracking. "Warned me if I kept pushing, I'd be accused of fabricating evidence. Said I'd never get my degree. That no university would touch a student who meddled in classified military operations." Michael sat in stunned silence, trying to process the scale of the cover-up. "I went back to Chicago," Julia whispered, "tried to forget, but I couldn't. I kept wondering what happened to them, to Emily. I searched records, contacted former Abbey staff, nothing. It's like they were erased." She pulled a folded paper from her coat and handed it to Michael. "I kept this, a scan of one of the reports. It's the only piece I managed to hide before the sheriff took the rest." Michael unfolded it, a blurry image of a typed military order. "Subject transfer to Site Echo. Observation to commence immediately. Appropriate call." "This is real," Julia nodded. "I don't know who's behind it now, but someone still wants it buried. They've been watching me. I see them parked near the boutique. My phone clicks during calls. They've searched my house." Max let out a low growl, his eyes fixed on the woods behind them. Julia tensed. Michael's voice dropped. "Why now? Why speak up again after all this time?" "Because something's changed," she said. "Because I heard singing again, 2 months ago near the same trail. It was faint, but it was her. I know it. I think she's still alive, Michael. I think Emily is down there." Michael stared into the darkness beyond the ridge, the valley stretching out beneath him like a secret yet to be uncovered. Far below, the bell of Coldwater Abbey rang midnight. The cold air from the observation deck still clung to Michael's skin as he drove back toward town, headlights slicing through the winding forest road. Max sat upright in the passenger seat, ears twitching, every muscle taut. Back in town, he pulled into a small parking lot behind Julia's boutique. The street was empty, most windows dark. Only a dim light glowed behind the curtains of Julia's shop. He hesitated a moment before knocking on the back door. It creaked open an inch, revealing Julia's pale face. She stepped aside without a word, letting him and Max in. Inside, the shop looked untouched. Sleek mannequins dressed in high fashion, elegant displays, but a faint tension hung in the air. Julia locked the door behind them and drew the heavy drapes. "I was afraid you wouldn't come," she whispered. "I had to," Michael replied. "If there's a chance Emily's alive, I'll do whatever it takes." Julia nodded, then walked toward a hidden cabinet beneath the cash register. With trembling hands, she unlocked it and pulled out a worn leather portfolio. She placed it on the counter and looked at him seriously. "If you want to understand who's behind this, you need to see this," she said. "But once you do, there's no turning back." Michael opened the portfolio. Inside were blueprints, newspaper clippings, and property deeds. Julia pointed to a folded map on top. "This," she said, "is a land registry map of Coldwater County. Updated just last year." Michael unfolded it, eyes scanning the various parcels of land marked in different colors. Near the northeast border, covering the dense forest and a portion of the mountain above the Abbey, one large section was marked with a red stamp, "Private Property, Stanton Entered." "The Stanton family?" Michael asked, frowning. Julia nodded grimly. "Gregory Stanton, CEO of Stanton Enterprises, state senator, one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in Vermont. His company owns nearly half of the region's construction contracts, and he has deep political connections." Michael's mind raced. What does he have to do with this? Julia pulled out another document, a declassified military service record. His father, Colonel Charles Stanton, served in Army intelligence during World War II, assigned to Project Echo. Michael stared at the page, the same project mentioned in the file Julia had shown him earlier. "After the war, Colonel Stanton settled in Vermont," Julia continued, "built Stanton Enterprises from the ground up. But according to some sources I found, he never really left Project Echo behind." She pointed to a faded black and white photograph of the colonel standing beside other officers in front of a bunker entrance. "This was taken in 1945. That entrance is on the very mountain you and I talked about." Michael felt a cold knot tightening in his stomach. Gregory Stanton inherited more than just a company, Julia said. He inherited secrets and control over the land that hides them. She handed him another document, an old property deed. In 1995, 1 year after the Nuns disappeared, Stanton Enterprises quietly purchased this parcel of land from the state. It used to be federal property, part of a decommissioned military installation. Michael traced the lines of the land on the map. That's the restricted zone. Julia nodded. Locals call it the forbidden area. No hunting, no hiking, no trespassing. Stanton claims it's an environmental preserve, but I've tracked activity up there for years. She reached beneath the counter and pulled out a small notebook. Every year on June 5th, the anniversary of the disappearances, Gregory Stanton drives up the mountain. Alone, no security, no staff. He stays for hours, sometimes overnight. Michael's breath caught. Why June 5th? I think it's the day they were locked away, Julia whispered. Some kind of ritual, or maybe to check on them. I don't know, but he's hiding something up there, and he's terrified of it coming to light. Michael looked at the map again, mind spinning. If Stanton's land covered the area where Project Echo's experiments took place, if that's where Emily and the others had been taken, then the answers were right there beneath that forested mountain. Julia's voice broke the silence. I tried to confront him once, she said, 2 years ago. I asked about the land, the old files. He smiled and told me it was best not to dig up the past. Then a week later, my car was broken into, my house searched. She met Michael's gaze. You need to be careful. If we go any further, Stanton won't hesitate to silence us. Michael clenched his fists. I'm not backing down. Julia seemed to weigh his resolve, then nodded. Good, because there's one more thing you need to see. She turned to a locked drawer beneath the counter and retrieved a small USB drive. This contains security footage from a trail camera I installed near the old logging road Stanton uses, the last time he went up just 3 weeks ago. Michael took the drive. I watch it. You should, Julia said. And Michael, one more thing. She reached across the counter and gripped his hand. Her fingers were cold. I think they're watching me again. If anything happens, don't stop. Michael squeezed her hand back. I won't. As he left the boutique with Max at his side, the town lay still, blanketed in deep silence. But Michael knew that above them, in the shadowed forest of Stanton's Mountain, something unspeakable waited. And now, at last, he had a trail to follow. Michael didn't sleep that night. He sat at his desk, staring at the USB drive Julia had given him, mind racing. The footage showed Stanton's SUV winding up the old logging road toward the restricted zone. Hours later, the SUV returned. No companions, no cargo, just the too cold emptiness of a man visiting secrets only he understood. But it was the timestamp that haunted Michael most. June 5th, the anniversary of Emily's disappearance dawn. Michael had already decided his next move. This was bigger than intuition now. They needed hard evidence. He needed to know what lay beneath that forested mountain. For that, there was only one person he trusted, David Crowley, his former college roommate, now a respected geologist and expert in ground-penetrating radar. Michael called him as the sun broke over the horizon. David, it's Michael. I need your help. It's about Emily. There was a pause. Michael, it's been 30 years. You really think? I know it sounds insane, but I've found something. I need to scan the mountain. There could be a structure under Stanton's land. David sighed. If you're serious, I'll be there, but we have to be discreet. Later that afternoon, Michael met David at an old maintenance shed near the base of the mountain, far from any official roads. David had brought his portable ground-penetrating radar unit in an unmarked van. The equipment wasn't exactly legal to use on private property without a permit, but after hearing Michael's story, David didn't hesitate. Max was with them, more alert than ever, nose constantly twitching as they approached the tree line. Julia had stayed behind. Michael insisted she lay low after the warning signs of surveillance around her shop. They began the slow climb, David guiding the radar sled along the overgrown path while Michael scanned the area for any sign of Stanton's patrols. The air grew colder as they ascended, dense fog lingering beneath the ancient pines. You said this was an old military installation? David asked, eyes on the radar screen. Stanton Stacher's father was involved in some kind of classified project. Julia found evidence that this land was transferred to Stanton Enterprises right after the disappearances. David grunted. Would explain why the ground's so disturbed. I'm getting anomalies already. Old trenches, maybe foundations. They pressed on, following Julia's notes toward the heart of the restricted zone. An hour in, David suddenly stopped. Hold on, he said, kneeling beside the radar array. He adjusted the frequency settings, eyes narrowing at the screen. There's something big down there, about 20 meters below us. David turned the screen toward him. Rectangular, too precise for a natural formation. You're looking at a man-made chamber, maybe a bunker. Michael stared at the grainy image. A large, boxy void beneath layers of bedrock and clay. His pulse pounded. This is it, he whispered. It has to be. David frowned. The ceiling looks intact, no obvious entrances. If Stanton sealed it, finding a way in won't be easy. Michael nodded grimly. I'll find a way. They continued scanning the perimeter of the anomaly, marking GPS coordinates. Hours passed, shadows deepening beneath the forest canopy. The deeper they went, the more Max grew agitated, tail stiff, ears high. Suddenly, near a moss-covered outcropping, Max froze. The shepherd growled low, then began frantically digging at the earth, paws kicking up clumps of soil and dead leaves. Max, what is it? Michael rushed to the spot, kneeling beside the dog. David joined them, puzzled. Maybe he smells something. Max's digging unearthed a rusted metal pipe, barely the width of a man's arm. The end was capped with a corroded grate. Michael brushed away the dirt, heart hammering. Old ventilation, David guessed. Could be connected to the chamber. Michael leaned closer, pressing his ear against the cool metal. At first, only silence. Then, faint, distant, a sound. A voice. Soft, ethereal, singing. He strained to listen, tears pricking his eyes as recognition struck. Ave Maria. Emily's voice. It was her. It had to be her. David, Michael gasped, voice shaking. She's alive. She's singing. David paled. Jesus, Michael, are you sure? Michael gripped the pipe, as if willing the metal to open. I'd know that voice anywhere. Max whined, nudging Michael's arm, eyes wide with urgency. Michael turned to David, determination hardening his gaze. We're not leaving. We have to find a way down. David hesitated, glancing around the darkening forest. If Stanton catches us, then we don't get caught, Michael snapped. Help me, please. David swallowed hard, then nodded. All right, we'll map the rest of this area first. If there's another access point, we'll find it. The wind stirred through the trees, carrying that faint, haunting melody through the pipe once more. Michael closed his eyes, grief and hope warring within him. Emily was alive. Somehow, against all reason, she had survived. And he was going to bring her home. The next morning, after barely any sleep, Michael met Julia at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. The discovery from the previous day had shaken them both to the core. Emily was alive. But now, with that fragile hope, came danger. Gregory Stanton had been visiting the site for years. He knew exactly what lay beneath the mountain, and if Michael and Julia could hear Emily's voice, Stanton surely could too. Should have to act fast, Michael said, voice low. David's mapping the remaining entrances. If we wait too long, Stanton might destroy everything. Julia nodded, her face pale but resolute. Tonight, then. Michael agreed. They would attempt entry that very night through one of the old mining tunnels David had identified. The risk was enormous, but neither could turn back now. As they were about to leave the cafe, the waitress approached their table. "A letter for you, sir. Someone left it at the counter." Michael frowned. He hadn't told anyone they were here. He unfolded the small envelope carefully. Inside was a single typed note. "Stop now, or you and the woman will disappear just like them. G.S." Michael's blood ran cold. Julia leaned over to read the message, her breath catching. "It's him," she whispered. Michael folded the note sharply. "He knows we're close." Julia looked around nervously. "We have to be even more careful. He's watching us." Michael nodded grimly. They left the cafe separately, taking winding routes through town to avoid any potential surveillance. Therefore they moved carefully, picked up Max from his house. The shepherd had grown increasingly alert since their last excursion. Somehow, the old dog seemed to understand the gravity of what they faced. By late afternoon, they regrouped at David's shed. The geologist had pinpointed an abandoned tunnel that once connected to the bunker system. The entrance was hidden behind dense undergrowth, rarely used and likely overlooked by Stanton's men. "You'll need climbing gear and lights," David warned. "And be ready for anything. If Stanton's watching the main access points, this is your best shot." Michael gripped his friend's shoulder. "Thank you, David. Stay safe." The sun had long since set when Michael, Julia, and Max reached the tunnel. Clouds blanketed the sky, the forest eerily silent. Every snapping twig made Julia jump. Every shadow seemed to watch them. The tunnel mouth gaped like a wound in the earth. Rusted beams framed the entrance, warning signs faded by time. "You sure about this?" Julia asked, her voice tight. Michael nodded. "It's now or never." They entered cautiously, flashlights cutting narrow beams through the darkness. The air grew colder, damper as they moved deeper. Max led the way, nose low to the ground, tail stiff. Half an hour in, the narrow shaft widened into an old service corridor. Tracks ran along the floor, once used for moving equipment. Ahead, a rusted bulkhead door hung ajar. The tunnel had collapsed further in, leaving only a narrow crawlspace. Michael squeezed through first, followed by Julia and then Max. The dog paused at the threshold, ears flicking, but pressed on after a soft command from Michael. They emerged into a chamber lined with cracked concrete. Faint electrical cables ran along the ceiling, relics of the bunker's original design. The sound of Emily's distant singing had faded, but Michael's resolve only hardened. "This is it," he whispered. Suddenly Max growled low, body tense. "Someone's here," Julia breathed. Before they could react, a harsh voice rang out, "You should have stopped when you had the chance." Figures stepped from the shadows, 4 men in dark clothing, armed and grim-faced. One raised a pistol. "Drop the lights. Hands where I can see them." Michael raised his hand slowly. "We're unarmed. We just want the women." "Too late for that," the leader sneered. "Orders are clear. No one leaves." In the split second that followed, Max lunged with a furious snarl, leaping at the nearest man. The gun fired, a sharp, deafening crack. Max yelped in pain, tumbling to the ground. "Max!" Michael shouted, surging forward. Chaos erupted. Julia grabbed a loose pipe from the floor and swung wildly, knocking one attacker off balance. Michael tackled another, fists flying. "Get out!" Julia screamed. Despite the pain, Max struggled to his feet, blood staining his fur. Driven by sheer loyalty, the dog limped forward, barking furiously and leading Michael and Julia toward a side passage. Bullets ricocheted off the walls as they fled. Michael grabbed Julia's arm, dragging her through the narrow corridor. Max limped ahead, barking hoarsely, guiding them with desperate determination. "They're right behind us," Julia gasped, tears streaking her face. "Keep moving," Michael urged. "We're almost there." The tunnel twisted sharply, the sound of pursuit growing fainter as they plunged deeper into the unknown. Max stumbled but pressed on, glancing back with pleading eyes. Michael's heart broke at the sight, but there was no choice. They had to reach Emily, and now, more than ever, they owed it to Max to finish what they'd started. Michael's pulse thundered in his ears as he dragged Julia through the twisting corridor, Max limping ahead but refusing to stop. The metallic scent of blood and the acrid tang of gunfire still hung in the air behind them. They could hear Stanton's men scrambling through the tunnels, but Max somehow seemed to know the right path to evade them. His battered body strained with every step, but his instincts were razor-sharp. "Stay with us, boy," Michael whispered, breathless, as they reached an intersection. Max gave a faint wag of his tail, then turned sharply to the left, leading them deeper into the forgotten warren. The corridor narrowed again, its concrete walls slick with moisture. Old cables dangled from the ceiling like vines in a jungle. After several tense minutes, Max stopped in front of what looked like an ancient steel door, half buried under debris and rust. His nose pressed against the base of the door, and he let out a low, desperate whine. Michael approached, wiping sweat from his brow. "This is it," he murmured. Julia nodded, tears streaking her dirty face. "She's here, I can feel it." Michael examined the door. It was sealed with a rusted chain and a corroded padlock. "Help me clear this," he said. Together, they pried away the debris, revealing faded military markings barely visible beneath the rust. Michael pulled a pry bar from his pack and wedged it under the lock. With a grunt of effort, he forced the metal to bend. The lock snapped with a sharp crack. The door groaned ominously as he pushed it open, revealing a narrow passage beyond. Stale, cold air rushed out, carrying with it a faint, haunting scent, a mix of dust, decay, and something achingly familiar. Max stepped inside first, ears alert but body trembling. Michael and Julia followed, flashlights cutting through the gloom. The passage opened into a dimly lit chamber, its concrete walls covered in crude paintings and Latin inscriptions. Candles had burned themselves out long ago, leaving soot-streaked holders behind. In the center of the room sat a frail figure, hunched and draped in a threadbare nun's habit. Her silvered hair was cut short, her skin paper-thin and pallid. Yet when she slowly lifted her head toward the intruders, her eyes, deep brown and haunted, widened in disbelief. Michael choked, taking a step forward. "Michael?" Her voice was a hoarse whisper, roughened by decades of disuse and damp air. Julia covered her mouth, tears falling freely. Emily blinked rapidly, as if unsure whether she was dreaming. She reached out a trembling hand. "It's really you?" Michael rushed to her side, gently taking her hand in both of his. "I'm here, Emily. I've come to take you home." Emily's frail body shook with sobs. I thought you were another vision. I've seen your face in dreams for so long." Michael embraced her carefully, mindful of her fragile frame. "You're safe now. We'll get you out of here." Behind them, Max let out a soft whimper and lay beside Emily, resting his bloodied head against her thin leg. She smiled weakly, stroking the brave shepherd's ear. "I've heard him before," she whispered. His voice came through the vents. "I thought perhaps angels were watching over us." Julia glanced around the chamber, noting a battered wooden box against the far wall. Inside were several small journals meticulously stacked. "Michael, look at this." He helped Emily to her feet and guided her toward the box. Julia opened the top journal, her breath catching as she read aloud. Sister Abigail, past winter of '99. Sister Margaret, pneumonia, 2003. Sister Claire, heart failure, 2007. Sister Helen, 2015. Michael swallowed hard, eyes burning. "Oh God," Emily's voice broke as she explained. "We kept records. We had to remember them somehow." Michael turned to his sister, voice gentle. "Emily, who did this to you? Who locked you here?" She shuddered and gripped his hand tightly. "We found documents in the archives beneath the abbey. Files from the war, experiments, horrors. We weren't supposed to see them." Her gaze drifted toward the darkened corners of the room. "Then, one night, we were taken, led here, locked away. The others, they couldn't endure it," Julia asked softly. "But how did you survive all these years?" Emily's expression darkened. "He called himself the Watchman. Always masked, never spoke. He brought food, water, supplies. Not often, just enough to keep us alive." Michael clenched his fists. "Who is he?" Emily's lips trembled. "I didn't know, not at first. But the last few years, I recognized him. His gait, his voice, when he thought I was asleep." Her eyes filled with a haunted certainty. "Gregory Stanton, it's him." Julia gasped audibly, her face draining of color. Michael's jaw tightened. "He's still coming here." Emily nodded weakly. "The food, the water, they've still been coming. He wants no one to know." The weight of her words settled heavily over them. Stanton wasn't just covering up his father's sins. He had kept Emily alive all these years to preserve the secret. "We're leaving, now." But even as he spoke, faint footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Max's ears flicked. He growled softly. Michael's heart pounded. Time was running out. "Stay close," he whispered urgently. "We'll get you out, Emily. I swear it." He motioned to Julia, who pocketed the journals and retrieved her flashlight. Together, they prepared to face whatever awaited beyond that cursed door. Michael steadied Emily as they hurried through the narrow tunnels, Max limping but determined at his side, Julia right behind, clutching the journals to her chest. Every footstep seemed louder than it should be, echoing off the cold stone walls. The distant sound of boots crunching gravel told them Stanton's men were closing in. The corridor twisted sharply upward. A faint draft of fresher air teased their senses. Michael knew they were nearing the surface, but danger lurked ahead. Max growled softly, sensing it first. They emerged into a wide chamber near the original entrance, a space long forgotten and littered with abandoned equipment. It should have been empty, but a voice stopped them cold. "Well done, Mr. Harper." Gregory Stanton stood in the center of the room, immaculate in a tailored overcoat, a small cadre of armed men flanking him. His steely eyes burned with cold satisfaction. "You found your sister. How touching." Michael instinctively pulled Emily behind him. Max bared his teeth, though his injured leg quivered. Julia's breath caught in her throat as she tightened her grip on the journals. Gregory took a step forward. "I warned you to stop." He raised a hand, and his men trained their weapons on the group. "But you couldn't leave well enough alone. Now you've forced my hand." Michael's voice was hoarse but defiant. "You kept her locked up for 30 years. You think you'll silence us now?" Gregory's smile was thin. "You overestimate your position. You're trapped. My men are under orders. No one will mourn a disgraced journalist, a washed-up priest, an old nun, and a stray dog." His gaze flicked to Max with a sneer. But Julia stepped forward, chin high. "You're wrong, Stanton. The story is already out." Gregory's brow furrowed. Julia's voice rang clear. "Before we came here, I sent digital copies of the journals, the photos, and your father's war files to national media contacts. Even as we speak, a reporter from the Washington Sentinel is preparing the expose." A flicker of doubt crossed Gregory's face. His gaze darted to one of his men, who immediately pulled out a phone, frantically dialing. Michael saw the hesitation and pressed. "You can kill us here, Gregory, but the world will know the truth. You can't bury it anymore." Gregory's mask of calm cracked, his lips pulled back in a snarl. "You arrogant fools. You think this ends with a few files? My influence to his men. Take them. We'll deal with this properly." Two armed guards advanced, one reaching for Julia, the other for Emily. Max let out a deep, guttural growl. Michael tensed, ready to fight, but knew he was outnumbered. Then, in a flash of ragged courage, Max launched himself forward. His injured body strained to its limit as he leapt at Gregory with a savage snarl. His jaws clamped onto Gregory's arm, tearing through fabric and flesh. Gregory screamed, stumbling backward as he tried to shake the dog off. In the chaos, the guards turned their guns toward Max. Seizing the moment, Michael lunged at the nearest guard, knocking his weapon aside. The gun discharged, the shot ricocheting harmlessly. Michael wrestled the weapon from the guard's grip, adrenaline surging. Julia elbowed the second guard in the throat, grabbing his arm and twisting until he dropped his rifle. Emily, though frail, struck out with surprising force, knocking the man off balance. With a roar, Michael aimed the recovered gun at Gregory. "Enough! Tell your men to back off." Gregory, blood dripping from his torn sleeve, face contorted in rage, barked, "Stand down! Stand down!" His voice cracked with panic as he tried to pry Max loose. Max finally released his grip, falling back against Michael's leg, panting heavily, his eyes still fierce despite the blood soaking his fur. Michael kept the gun steady. "Move away from the exit, now." Gregory glared, hatred burning in his gaze, but he gestured his men to comply. They slowly stepped aside, weapons lowered, but fingers twitching. Michael didn't take his eyes off them. "Julia, get Emily out of here now." Julia nodded, guiding Emily toward the corridor that led upward. Michael backed toward them, gun trained on Gregory the entire time, but the tension in the air remained razor-sharp. Michael knew they weren't safe yet. Max, though barely able to stand, pressed close to Michael, ready to defend them again if needed. And as they edged toward the uncertain safety of the surface, Michael's mind raced. Stanton wouldn't give up so easily. The game was far from over. The sun was just beginning to rise over the Green Mountains when the National Police, backed by a team of federal investigators, arrived at the Stanton estate. The perimeter was secured swiftly, the grand iron gates of the property standing open as black SUVs and armored vans rolled up the driveway. Gregory Stanton, his arm bound and still bruised from Max's bite, sat in the study of his sprawling mansion under heavy guard. His composure shattered. He had been arrested the previous night, along with several of his closest associates, after Michael and Julia had delivered Emily safely into federal custody and provided the evidence they had uncovered. Now the house was to be searched from top to bottom. Michael stood in the cold morning air beside Julia, Emily resting in a wheelchair wrapped in a blanket, her eyes wary but alight with a resolve that had only grown stronger. Max lay at her feet, bandaged, breathing heavily, but refusing to leave her side. The dog's presence seemed to calm her, anchoring her in a world that had once seemed so distant and cruel. Inside the estate, the investigators moved methodically. They started in Stanton's private study, where hidden compartments were discovered behind bookshelves. There, neatly stacked in aged leather folders, were documents long thought destroyed. Detailed reports from the 1940s described human experimentation under the direction of Colonel Henry Stanton, Gregory's father, conducted in secret bunkers beneath the mountains. Among the files were names of victims, dates of experiments, and chilling photographs. Further down, the team uncovered Gregory's personal journals, where he had meticulously recorded his role in the prolonged captivity of the 5 nuns. In painfully clinical language, he wrote of the necessity of their isolation, of how their silence was vital to preserving the Stanton legacy and its corporate empire. Perhaps most damning of all was a list of local law enforcement officials who had been paid off over the decades to ensure the cover-up remained intact. Police chiefs, detectives, even judges, names that would soon rock Vermont's political and judicial circles. Outside, as word of the findings spread among the media gathered at the gates, reporters began broadcasting the story live across the nation. The nun who survived 30 years underground became a headline that gripped America. A year passed. Gregory Stanton and numerous co-conspirators were prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. The trial was one of the most sensational in Vermont's history. Michael testified, as did Julia and Emily. The evidence was irrefutable. Stanton was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole, his once proud name forever disgraced. Emily, during this time, underwent extensive rehabilitation. Her body had been weakened by decades of confinement, but her spirit remained indomitable. Michael stayed by her side throughout, as did Julia, who had grown close to Emily through the ordeal. Max, aging and scarred, remained her constant companion. And then, on a crisp spring morning, exactly 1 year after her rescue, Emily returned to the newly restored St. Agnes Monastery. The old stone chapel had been renovated, its once faded frescoes glowing anew beneath fresh layers of paint. The local bishop himself presided over the special mass held that day, honoring the memory of the 4 nuns who had perished and celebrating Emily's miraculous survival. Michael sat in the front pew, Julia beside him. The chapel was packed with parishioners, reporters, and visitors from across the country. Cameras discreetly captured the moment, though out of respect no live broadcast was permitted. The choir began its hymn, but soon fell silent as Emily, now garbed once again in the simple robes of a nun, stepped forward. The congregation held its breath. For a moment, the chapel was so quiet that one could hear the faint rustle of leaves through the stained glass windows. Then, from Emily's lips, rose the pure, haunting strains of the same hymn she had sung in the darkness of the bunker. A Maria. Her voice, though aged, carried a depth and power that spoke of unimaginable endurance and unbroken faith. Michael felt his throat tighten, tears stinging his eyes. Around him, many openly wept. Even the reporters lowered their cameras, awed by the raw humanity of the moment. At Emily's feet, Max lay quietly, his eyes closed, his breath slow but steady. Time had taken its toll on the old shepherd, but he remained steadfast in this final duty. To those watching, the sight of the loyal dog beside the singing nun became an image of eternal devotion, captured in countless photographs that would later circulate the world. As the last notes faded, the chapel remained silent for a long beat, the sacred stillness lingering. Then, slowly, the congregation rose in a standing ovation, not of applause, but of reverent respect. After the service, as Michael helped Emily down the monastery steps, she paused, gazing toward the distant hills that had once imprisoned her. Her voice was soft but clear. "I never thought I would sing under the sun again." Michael squeezed her hand. "And now the whole world hears you?" But as the crowd dispersed, few noticed a lone figure standing at the edge of the forested hill beyond the monastery. Cloaked in a deep red coat, the woman watched the scene in silence. For a moment, her eyes lingered on Emily and Max. Then, without a word, she turned and disappeared into the trees, Julia Turner, her part in the story unfinished, her own shadow still trailing her through the ever-deepening woods. The story had ended, yet in the heart of Vermont, among the whispering pines and ancient stones, the echoes of truth would resonate for generations to come. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more true mystery narratives like this one. Which moment in this story surprised you the most? And where are you watching from today? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation going.